All right, thanks everybody for tuning in. Special presentation of Gladiators TV here. I'm Nick Bove, voice of the Gwinnett Gladiators, and joining me is head coach Andy Brandt. Now, Andy, the reason that we're doing this is I know that you already went into depth about the moves that the Gladiators were going to make last week with Christine Troike of the Gwinnett Daily Post. But since the trades have happened this week, there's been a little bit of concern about what's going on with the Gladiators from the Gladiators fan base. So hopefully maybe you can just explain off the top, what's the thinking process behind some of the trades that have been made this week and what's going on for the future of the Gladiators?
There's a couple things. Obviously, in order to acquire assets for next year's roster, we have to give up some assets. And we did talk about that briefly with Christine last week. So for us, it's not by any means giving up on this season. We acquired character guys. We acquired guys that are going to work no matter what situation they're in. Obviously, coming to an environment of sorts that we have is we're not a playoff team. So we have to make sure when we recruit these players that we recruit character guys that are going to come in and work no matter what. And that's the MO of the guys we got. That's their background, their work ethic guys, their leaders on and off the ice, which is important to us. As well as step two in the whole process is acquiring future assets. And we did that in our trades. We acquired future assets in pretty much every deal we did to help set us up for success next year.
So we'll break it down into two specific areas. First, the players that the Gladiators acquired up front, and then we'll talk about the future considerations in just a little bit. So starting off, one of the early trades from this week, Gladiators acquired Anthony Luciani from the Toledo Walleye and then sent him to Greenville and got back Scott Arnold, who was a former forward for the Gladiators. So what's the thinking process behind that trade, and what did the Gladiators acquire in Scott Arnold?
Scott Arnold is that character guy that we talked about. Obviously, he played here a couple years back, and then we had success on the team he was on. He was a young player at that point. He's matured in his game, both on and off the ice. And we talk, like I said, we talk about character. That's Scott Arnold coming in there. Also in that deal are two future considerations. Those two future considerations are players to be named later. And those players to be named later are big for us. In some of these future trades, we know who we're getting. It's already been committed to by both parties, and some of these trades are futures, meaning we'll work it out after the season. But in that case, we do know the two players to be named later, and that was a big part of that deal.
Another trade that happened earlier this week, sending Gary Nunn out to Ontario, getting Robert Zarnik back from the Ontario Reign. Zarnik has a lot of AHL experience under his belt. Is there a fear that he might leave the country after this season, or are you confident in the kind of guy that the Gladiators are getting?
We're confident there, and that's something we discussed before we made that deal is, the possibility of him going over to Europe next year. Obviously, that's a possibility for any player these days, is to jump over to Europe and experience that. But something we discussed as a staff in depth is making sure that he wanted to come and play in Gwinnett. And before we made the deal, we got word that, hey, he was committed to coming to play for Gwinnett Gladiators. And he's a motivated guy. Like you said, he's got the AHL pedigree, and he's motivated to get back to the AHL. And we're happy to have him here to help him get back to that level of hockey. So he's a guy that we look to score some goals for us and provide some offense. But again, a kid that has that pedigree in the American League, has the resume, and a known leader as well.
And the big trade from today is that Casey Piero-Zabatel is being traded out to the Florida Everblades. Gladiators are getting a lot back in that deal, getting Jason Wilson, getting Jeff Salingo, getting future considerations as well as monetary considerations. Is there a thought process that maybe with any of the players that the Gladiators have traded this past week that there might be an opportunity to reacquire them next season?
Yeah, and this is one of those trades, as well as we just talked about the Gary Nunn trade, and with the Casey Piero-Zabatel trade, we have the option of picking them back up after the season. And what we mean by that is their veteran status. Any player with veteran status in the ECHL becomes a free agent at the end of the season. So we trade away both Gary and Casey now for future considerations, as well as players up front, assets that we can acquire. Also knowing there is that possibility that we can sign both Gary and Casey back next season if they're willing to come back and play for the Gwinnett Gladiators.
So that's obviously good news for Gladiators fans. Now, taking a look over the entire trade cycle that the Gladiators have gone through this season, the Gladiators have acquired 4 players up front, and then in addition to that, 7 future considerations for next season. Maybe you could go into depth a little bit more about the future considerations ends of things and explain that to fans, what that means. Are the Gladiators already have players in mind, or are they going to pick from a pool of players or something like that?
In some of these future considerations, there are players that are silently named, and there are players that are agreed upon by both parties. So at the conclusion of the 2014-15 season, we know who we're getting in those future considerations. A couple of the future considerations, there will be a list provided to the Gwinnett Gladiators in which we can choose a player off that list from whatever team we have the future considerations from. So it's a bit of both. As far as the future considerations, obviously, some of those guys that we know who we're getting, we're excited about. And then, also having the ability to choose from a list kind of gives us an advantage to choose between certain players that we might feel to be a good fit here in Gwinnett coming up for the next season.
Now, taking a look over the entire thing, some of the fans have expressed some concern that the Gladiators have never gone through anything like this, taking away some of the big scores off the table and not retaining them throughout the rest of the season and considering hanging on to them for next season. Is this an idea that, something that you have in mind, you want to start fresh and clean for next season?
I think so. I mean, it's 17 wins. We're at 17 wins, and that's not acceptable, especially for an organization like Gwinnett. It's got a winning tradition and a winning background, and to go through the past 2 seasons in the way we have isn't acceptable. When you think about that, you think about the players that are here. And they've had the chance to prove what they can do through the past 60 games, and obviously we haven't gotten it done. So as far as starting fresh for next season, it's something that we look forward to. We can bring in some of those guys that we talked about and reacquire those guys that we have traded away, but at the same time we have to take a long, hard look and see what we need to succeed in Gwinnett. And you look at Toledo, for example, the season they had last year, they finished in the bottom of the league, and now you look at them and how they turned things around this year, being at the top of the league. And if you take a good look at their roster, they brought back 3 players from last year. So in all, if we're really thinking about it there, they brought back those 3 guys and they wiped the rest of the roster. So it's something that you kind of look at other teams and learn from their mistakes, or learn from how they have had success, and you form your own recipe using the knowledge that you've gained through others.
So, good game plan in place from the sounds of it, a well thought out game plan. And finally, a last question, and this one comes from the outer fringe of the fan base. Some have made some conspiracy theories that, the timing of all this has been interesting. Steve Chapman leaves the organization to go to St. Louis. The Gladiators trade away the top half of the offense away. Some feel like they're going through Thrasher's withdrawals all of a sudden, that the team might leave the area. How confident are you to say that the Gladiators are here to stay for the years to come?
Extremely confident. This is an organization that's been here for years, and it's a well-grounded organization that takes pride in knowing that they're going to be in the league for years to come. So, obviously, we're going through growing pains, and that's part of hockey. Is you have your ups and downs. Sometimes it gets worse before it gets better. You hear that saying quite a bit. So, for us, we're going through the growing pains now. We're extremely excited about the assets we acquired in the trades here, moving forward for the last games of the season here. Like I said, by no means are we cashing it in. Like, we're going to put a competitive team on the ice that's going to come out and compete and work hard for 60 minutes. So for the rest of the season, we're looking forward to that, but we're also, in the back of our minds, really looking forward to getting things turned around next season. We've done that through some of the future considerations we've acquired, and like I said, we're here for the long haul.
Well, I can echo that statement up myself tell you personally, fans, we are here to stay for years and years to come, so don't worry about that. I'd also like to thank the fans. I know that this has been an up and down season for the Gladiators, but rest assured, we are very thankful for those of you that have come out to the games. The support has been never better than this season from the Glads Nation. So, on behalf of Gladiators head coach Andy Brandt, I'm Nick Bove. Thanks for tuning in. We hope to see you. Our next game is tomorrow, 7:35 puck drop, as we take on the South Carolina Stingrays here at the arena at Gwinnett Center. Until then, thanks for tuning in, everybody.